craftsmanship, per se. It can be, you know, if you look at Westerman, et cetera, but it's more about hard work. You know, if you go back again, you can take a look at people, you know, look at these four coming to the present: Manier Dawson, Archibald Motley, Seymour Rosofsky, Leon Golub. All really hard workers, all incredibly different from one another. I think it's interesting also that Chicago so embraced Dubuffet lecture in 1953 that talks about visceral and art brut and that kind of strength, and simultaneously in the mid-50s, Chicago embracing surrealism. And I suspect that's because of a Jewish population that embraced notions of psychotherapy, and that surrealism touched on that. But if you take those two antecedents, it seems to me that the Harry Who almost have to come out of that, you know, of the melding of those kinds of influences. Now, I think that that too is an anomaly, but more of a sidetrack, you know, that then comes together again. Look at these people: Tony Fitzpatrick, Vera Clement, Ruth Duckworth, William Conger, Suzanne Doremus, Kerry James Marshall, Tony Tassett, Jason Sullivan, Mary Lou Zelazny, Dawood Bey. You know, I mean, again, you see, I think all those artists who are succeeding here today, but are all moving in different kinds of directions. Look at a younger population: Juan Chavez, Cody Hudson, Laura Farsberg, Conrad Freeberg, Emmett Kerrigan, Davis Langlois, Mariana Levant, Karen Reimer, Todd Plavisco. I mean, these people: Diana Guerrero Macia, Ken Fandel, K.S. Reeves, Josh Garber, Howard Fonda, Burton Wooden Holmes. They're all totally different kinds of directions. You know, I mean, I think that they show out of town, which is another point. This is a really good place to work. There are a lot of artists here who succeed brilliantly elsewhere. Lincoln Schatz, Tony Fitzpatrick, design, Tom Skomsky, Bob Guinan. Most of you probably don't know who he is. Inigo, Sabrina Raff. You know, I mean, there's a lot of divergent aesthetics here and people who don't get seen very well here but are doing remarkably well elsewhere. So I don't know. I mean, Hamza mentioned how in the 90s we have a loss, you know, and a paradigm shift and people leaving. I don't think so. You know, I had a gallery then. I think you have a sense of whether there are more people coming in, an influx of artists and population, or an exodus. I think there were more people coming in. I think that the kind of art that was more post-minimal and more cerebral, more mental, I think it's a subcategory that exists here, perhaps on the fringes, but I don't think it's so much part of the mainstream. And whether it serves as a foil to the more common activity of a work ethic that goes on, I mean, I think there's room for obviously more than one aesthetic, and you can have a group that's joined by some commonality. I don't know. That then goes to the question about regionality, and I don't think it exists. I think that, you know, it isn't about region versus nation or region versus world. I think it's sort of like region and world or region and nation, and that we can participate in different kinds of places that we fit. I think you have to find affinities, you know, based from extrapolating from the power of the internet, and certainly some people here have as much in common with another artist in Israel. That's fine, but I don't think you have regionalism. I think, you know, place makes a difference. Place, I think, affects the attitude that most of us here bring to the arts, and I think it's quantifiable. And like Lynne talks about, you know, being able to see some thread that you see in New Orleans, I think you do, and in South Texas and in Western Washington and New York also. I think you do here, but maybe because we're more familiar with what goes on here, it's more difficult for me to quantify that kind of thread. Place is relevant, but I don't know, you know, per se if it's an asset to define yourself as a Chicago artist or a deficit, but I think the fact is that you are one, and that having a good work ethic is always going to serve you well.
All right, we'll round it out. So now we can talk amongst ourselves. And I'll start by saying, that wasn't that bad, Paul. I don't think we disagree that much. This go round.
Okay.
No, but I think the point you made about it being a very, you know, I was saying earlier that it's a very heterogeneous affair now, that if, you know, which I think was one of the main thrusts, introduction-wise, where I would totally agree and say, no, if you put together a roster, you know, just hold it to 10, and you would find that none of them have anything in common, which is a much more definitive aspect of Chicago than any kind of, even if we were to, you know, even with Lynne's sort of, you could probably broaden the issue of, you know, craft, or any of those stylistic traits, I would say, you'd probably open them up and find spaces where that kind of heterogeneity, could be accommodated. So again, even within the craft definition. But yeah, I didn't think that was that bad, Paul, in terms of fighting words. So as moderator, I'd like just to touch on a few points made by you guys, and we could jump in discussion-wise. First, Philip, I was struck when you said you have more in common, you think you have more in common with artists in Amsterdam or Mexico City, and it's great. Pre-internet, if we can all, think back that far. It was funny with the idea of new music. Everybody was like, every place was an island, and so if a gig happened here, in Chicago, there was a sense, there wasn't a sense that the 30 people who came to the gig here in Chicago had anything to do with the 30 people who went to the gig in Kansas City or the 30 people who went to the gig in, in New Orleans. But I think the idea, part of the effect of the internet is a feeling that you are connected to others, even if you are, no matter how small the community, you and others like you. You can no longer have this sort of sense of isolation, in that way. So to say, even if you don't feel like you have an immediate correspondence out on the street with, what's going on around here, that you do have it elsewhere, and that's enough to sustain you in some sense, and even to hold at bay this idea about being specifically like a Chicago artist, it wouldn't, dawn on you. I think it's it's quite nice. With you, Elizabeth, it was great things I didn't know about Three Walls. I didn't know the extent of I didn't know that the solo was just Chicago, and nor did I know that you get $500 with it, the most literal direct form of support. So your money is where your mouth is. But the issue of visibility and exposure is the one that would come up over and over again, that you would see that as if, tree in the forest, if I do this show, what happens? But I'm always curious about that who, why, what, for whom kind of relationship. It's funny, Chuck, in doing the Simp Arc show and doing Freebasin, for me, in my own head, it was really important that it had, I felt like finger on here, a certain, this wasn't done, despite whatever happened, whatever the fate of that thing would have been, that it was much more about corralling whatever forces and energies were, it would be an internal combustion engine. And it wasn't you read art form and you go, it's damn, Stockholm really has it going on. You always see this place envy, but I specifically wanted to not, to say whatever's going to happen with this thing, with the immediate users of it and partaking of it, it's all going to be, for a sense of it going on for us, first and foremost, before thinking about it what are the ramifications, or I hope there's press outside this about that kind of thing. But it's interesting at Three Walls that they, are saying the exposure, feeling like it has to be somebody to hear the tree fall as a, but even outside of the immediate sort of Chicago community, to try and, guarantee that for them, because it's quite nice. So, Lynne, it was great. You